character and creature design. Not necessarily in that order. Sure. Yeah, just a tad. Sorry, Preston's helping me with the lights. My name is Brian Hales. I have been working for myself for about 10 years now through my company Hales Art, doing full-time illustration and graphic design. Prior to the 10 years, I was doing graphic design for Coldwell Banker Commercial, which I was not passionate about. But I'm currently making about 3 times what I was making at Coldwell. So if anybody tells you you can't make a living as an artist, don't believe them. You just have to have some kind of discipline. But today we're going to talk about creature and character design. I've worked on a lot of different projects in a lot of different genres, and you'll see through this presentation a lot of different styles. To deliver to a diverse array of clients, I've sort of learned to develop different styles and, basically zero in on whatever the project calls for. And so I'll give you some examples of some of my work as we talk through this. So this is me at 4 years old. Obviously I was a big He-Man fan. But just to give you a little example of where I started out the same as every other 4-year-old in the world. This I drew last year, so there's been a little bit of a learning curve over the last 25 years. This is also at 4 years old. I don't know if that's Superman or A-Man. I'm not quite sure what the A stands for. But I also did this, let's see, it was, actually these were 2 years ago. My version of Supergirl. Is there a way we can focus that a little more? It's a little bit blurry. Here's my rendition of Raph. So when we're talking about creature and character design, obviously there's these, popular world icons. Marvel and DC have quite a collection of intellectual properties. Their IPs are quite diverse, but all very familiar to us because they have the budget to get it out there, right? But I was kind of hoping to talk more about how to be creative, how to do something that hasn't been done before. So if you're somebody that wants to, just create characters that already exist, that's cool. It's really hard to break into. And I'm actually more interested in new IPs, new characters, new designs, stuff that has never been done before. And you can just go to Google Images and find a plethora of examples of amazing creature and character design. Here are just a few examples. This is a dragon. Of course, there's a zillion different kinds of dragons. Here's a little elf. As you go to art schools and film schools where you study concept art, you'll get a lot of assignments like this where you do little variations on the same character, different costumes, different colors, different hairstyles, whatever it is that you're working on. Sculpture is also huge in creature and character design, when you're talking about concepts. Imaging 3D is actually quite helpful when you're creating characters because you get to see it from all angles and you get to decide what that character looks like from all angles. Here's an example from The Hobbit. I know, not great films, but you can't deny that the creature and character design was amazing. Especially that back view with this orc, awesome. So I'm going to show a few examples here, like I have of stuff that I did not do, but stuff that I respect. This one is amazing, for the simple fact that there's about, a dozen different character designs in this one image. Art directors and editors love if you can do this. Not just draw a single character with a white background or a gray background, but actually, put them in a scene, put them in an action scene, have a lot of stuff going on. That's the stuff that's impressive, obviously. And so now I'm going to move into some of my inspirations, like some of my favorites. I just have examples from 2 here. Has anyone ever heard of Xiaodi Jin? I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. Xiaodi Jin. He's a creature character designer, from the Orient, and he's just amazing. What he's done here, you can see that he's taken basically the anatomy of animals that exist in our world, and he sort of morphed them all into one creature. You know, the head there, it resembles that of a lizard, a little bit of sort of fish-like characteristics. You have the shoulder blades here and the wings that resemble that of a bat or a bird. You know, kind of a juvenile bird skeletal structure. And then, of course, you have the horse, kind of a cat-like tail. They're coming off the back. And so to do something completely fantastical, you don't have to totally make it up. You just take things that exist in the natural world and you can morph them together. And a lot of times it works quite beautifully because it looks realistic. Here's some zombie knights. I don't know what you would call these.
Frost giants.
But I mean, yeah, frost giants, there you go. In armor. You don't usually see frost giants in armor. Yeah, I mean, these aren't so far off from medieval armor. I don't know if you've ever visited the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, but they have examples of actual armor from the Middle Ages. And you know, you can take something, like I said, that actually exists in history or in the natural world, and you can just tweak it a little bit. And usually that will help largely improve your fantasy creations, but also give them a base in reality. I wanted to ask, how many, I can kind of see everybody, how many artists do we have? How many people are interested in creating characters and creatures artistically? Okay, so a little more than half the room. And how many writers in the room? Okay, a little less than half. Cool. I'm going to talk about both. I've worked on a lot of different projects, and I'm a writer and illustrator. And I've also worked for national brand clients and stuff, so we'll talk a little bit about both as we go along. I just wanted to get a feel for how many of each we had. Has anybody seen an animal that looks like this? I've seen about 3. If you took a sheep, a hippopotamus, and what are those little, like not wombats, but those little rodents with the
Guinea pig.
kind of a guinea pig. They're not guinea pigs. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, but I mean, this looks like it could belong on Star Wars, right? But it's just a hippopotamus, whatever that is, and a sheep, right? So basically this is what we know scorpions look like, but you can tell that the anatomy is a little different from the natural world scorpions, and obviously it's size. Size is a big factor when you're creating fantastical monsters and creatures. One thing I thought was cool, if any of you are familiar with Avatar, when you have a tree that's the size of the Empire State Building, a lot of times it's cool in your world building to actually give actual science to that. I know I watched this really bad kind of B-rated documentary about Titanoboa. Has anybody seen that on Netflix? So, and they were asking the right questions though, that when they were studying this giant snake skeleton that they found. They said, how can a snake get this big in our world? And they basically came to the determination that the climate must have been a whole lot warmer. Because for an animal to get that big, you know, they sort of took into account the amount of food that it would have to consume on a daily basis, and the types of food that it eats, and the area of the world where, you know, creatures do tend to get a little bigger, you know, like the anaconda. And anacondas live in very humid, very, very warm climates. And so they were kind of looking at not only the creature itself, but its environment and what would shape that environment. So when you're creating a scorpion, if it's for a, you know, sci-fi or fantasy novel that's this big, you know, like in Clash of the Titans, you have to ask yourself, what is it about the environment that would allow a creature to get this big? And a lot of times that can add a level of reality and texture to your story, and believability as well. So this is still Xiaodi Jin, some of the best dragons I've ever seen rendered. Just amazing. Here's another, the same series, probably the same story. All right, so this is a little hard to see on the wall there without a screen, but this is, anybody know who this is? Who illustrated this? It's Deja Thoris, Maid of Mars. This is Michael Whalen. He also did Brandon Sanderson's Way of Kings cover. But this is from, I think he did these in the early 80s. Waylon was a big influence on me as a kid. A lot of you probably recognize this from Anne McCaffrey cover. Right. Michael Whalen is the artist that's famous for getting paid more than the author who wrote the book, just for doing the cover. I'm sure he was paid quite handsomely when they took him out of retirement to do Brandon's cover. But he was one of the first artists to attack the Edgar Rice Burroughs, Tarzan, John Carter of Mars. His was the first of these, four-armed green aliens that I saw. And he has a book called Michael Whalen's Works of Wonder that really influenced me as a kid growing up. And I wanted to do what he does. This is one of his Ice World of, it's not Hoth, but it's something similar. Hoth is Star Wars. But I mean, look at that creature design. How amazing is that? It has the eyes of a dragonfly, the horns of a rhino, kind of human arms, kind of human anatomy. It's the anatomy of a centaur and a bear mixed, right?
I'm trying to figure out
polar bear centaur.
Nostrils or eyes.
All right.
Yes.
But amazing, and it works, right?
No,
he made this
they're
crazy
nostrils,
thing
the
work
eyes
when
of the
he
big
combined all of these different anatomical structures from so many animals. Here's one of his famous white dragons, Anne McCaffrey, Dragon Riders of Pern. And then this is one I did. I just finished this one a few months ago. This is one of my passion projects. For a few years, I hadn't really done anything for me. I was working on projects for stories that I was writing, comics that I was illustrating, dozens of projects for book covers and for other clients. But a few months ago, I was like, do you know what? I'm going to do something for me, not for money, not for a specific project, just for fun. And this is what came out. Also, this next one, the mermaid. I was like, I'm just going to paint a dragon and a mermaid because I want to. So these are my creature character designs of late. I wanted to do a mermaid that I hadn't really seen before. Something from, the New England type crashing waves on the rocks sort of thing. But it's fun to take a human and add a fishtail and kind of do some research into different kinds of fish, different kinds of scales, different kinds of tails and fins. Obviously, you can tell from, from this style, you would think it's two different artists, but I do, like I said, a lot of different styles. I did a spy novel. I finished writing it last year. It's called Blink. I wanted to do something that was, I love the Daniel Craig Bond movies. I love the Bourne movies, the Bourne trilogy. I love the Dark Knight trilogy. I wanted to do something similar, but with a female protagonist, and something that attacks the conspiracies of our day. The man behind the curtain that doesn't exist but controls everything. The man infinitely powerful than Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. And so the villain in my story, Blink, is the International Central Bank. And so Blink is sort of a champion for the little guy, that basically goes against the system. So this is, firstly I did this kind of cartoony version, thinking I was going to do a graphic novel. And in my panel tomorrow, I'll show some of the initial comps, the thumbnails and things that I was going to do for Blink, the graphic novel. But as I kind of developed the project, I found that it's actually going to fit better as a illustrated novel. And so I wrote a 400-page novel that's going to have 1 or 2 illustrations per chapter. So basically just splash pages. I'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow in my thumbnails, comps, panels, and splash pages panel that I have tomorrow afternoon. But anyway, you can kind of see the progression of my cover. I wasn't totally satisfied with this, so this is going to be an interior illustration. This was the final image for my cover. I got a New York agent about 6 months ago. He's currently shopping this around to publishers. And so I'm going to talk a little bit now about character creation. We've talked a little bit about creatures and in fantasy and science fiction. But now we're going to talk about characters, and I'm kind of going to go back and forth because, obviously every story generally has both. And even a human can be considered a creature, right? If you think of characters like Hannibal Lecter, or if you think of Dan Wells, he's here. I might as well a little plug in for him. I am not a serial killer. A lot of creatures can actually exist in in thrillers and sci-fi and that sort of thing. And so with Blink, I wanted to kind of showcase all of my main characters, even some of the secondary characters. And these are people I know. So Kim modeled for this. She's a friend of mine. There's me. I was Charlie Denton, the assassin. Here's one of the bad assassins. His name's Joffrey Lancer. This is an illustration from near the end of the story. It takes place in Edinburgh. This is one of my assassins that opens the book, Myers. He's also a friend of mine. A lot of times I'll cast friends and family as characters, but if I can't really find somebody who I know that fits the image in my head for a certain character, I'll hire characters or models from Model Mayhem or other agencies. Another friend of mine, Sarah, she's actually modeling in LA now, but she plays the twins, Masami and Sayuri. This is a friend of mine, John. He plays Officer West, CIA. Obviously that's a little different from this. A client, Berg Pediatric Dentistry, they're kind of a local. They have, I think, 12 locations. For the longest time, they have one character, Molar Man, he was basically the face of their company. And they hired me to create more characters for their brand. And so I created Agent Fluoride, we have here, Cavity Miner, Dr. Diet. And when the kids come in to get their teeth cleaned or whatever, they give the kids these cards, but they've also taken my images and plastered them on the walls, in life-size versions. So if you take your kids to the dentist, you might see some of these. Flosser. A friend of mine modeled for this. She's also a character in my graphic novel, Continuum, which I think I have some examples of in here. Gingivitis. I wish this was bigger. It's okay. Halitosis. She's got some bad breath. So. Incisor Girl. So she's one of the main characters next to Molar Man. The Infector. Then we have Molar Man. They had me do a few of Molar Man. This is their main guy here. So I just did some new illustrations. So they weren't just using their logo illustration on everything. Professor Flack. He's got some characteristics similar to Riddler sort of thing. And so this is, we're going back to my graphic novels, my comics. Continuum is a graphic novel. It was published in 2011. They wanted to publish Dragon's Gate and Devil's Triangle, two books that I had already done. But I didn't like the contract, but they still hired me to illustrate Continuum, which was an IP they already owned. Sort of a military science fiction actioner. And so this was the cover I designed for them. I actually drew these images before they sent me a finished script. All they sent me was sort of a rough outline for the story. And that's me, obviously, right? And these are the 7 main characters, the 7 elite soldiers. The premise was these 7 elite soldiers from the future are sent back in time to prevent the assassination of an Israeli prime minister that starts World War III. So they go back in time to try to stop World War III from ever happening. And so these 7 elite soldiers they send back, obviously they would have a bigger budget than what the regular military has. And so I made these custom suits of armor for each character and the weaponry that best suits them. Again, a lot of these are models that I used of people I know. All right, and then we have this cute little guy. I wanted to mention, when you're creating characters, they don't have to be human. They don't have to be aliens or monsters or fantasy or sci-fi. They can be animals with personalities. This is a drawing from the upcoming children's book that I'm doing. It's called Don't Go Near the Crocodile Ponds. And the protagonist, the main character, is this little wildebeest named Jaffer. This is him being born. Last year, Salt Lake Comic Con had me do the cover, and I also submitted a short story that's in the anthology, Heroic, Tales of the Extraordinary. And so this was an illustration from David Farland's book, or his short story that's in the anthology. I believe we're going to have copies of this at the book signing tonight, Blake Castleman and I. So come check out our booth. You can grab a copy. We'll sign it for you. But this is from David Farland's short story called The Proving Ground. Great story, by the way. Now I'm going to show some examples of some of the creature and character designs I did for this graphic novel, Dragon's Gate. This was the first graphic novel I ever wrote and illustrated. It has, let's see, I believe, 84 full-page illustrations, or comic pages, but they're all done in this style. This was one of the early concept sketches that I did. There are creatures in the story called drakens. They're sort of humanoid, dragon-like characters that speak. And this was one of my early sketches, and I still love this sketch. I just love the movement and the expression or whatever in it. But then I went and did some more highly rendered versions of the drakens. Right there. This is actually a 4-foot oil painting. Dragon's Gate went through a lot of different versions before I came out with the final, published book. So this was one of the early oil paintings that explored one of the scenes. This is called Execution Errand. But the drakens ride these giant bears. You can kind of see in the background there. So this is a map that I did for Dragon's Gate. I put this in here just because I wanted to mention, I think I already did though, when you're creating characters and creatures, to be aware of the environment that they live in. What makes them the way they are, what gives them their specific attributes. This was a more zoomed in version of everything that happens in Volume 1. And these are my characters. This is Alina, a friend of mine from college. This is Barson, one of my friend's dads. I wanted a sort of a Sean Connery look. He doesn't quite look like Sean Connery, but he sort of embodied that character's personality, especially those eyes. It was great. Yours truly, with Fabio hair. This is Philippe. And by the way, I did these a long time ago. I did these about 15 years ago. This is my dad. Also has that kind of Sean Connery look. Now back to creature design. So this is a basilisk. So I wrote the basilisk into the story. I wanted to do something that I hadn't seen before. You have the basilisk on Harry Potter, who looks like basically a giant snake with a dragon head. Most of the basilisks I had seen had looked a little reptilian, but that didn't sit quite right with me, as they live in the ocean or in lakes or whatnot. And so I sort of used the visage of a moray eel, or the facial structure of a moray eel to do mine. I thought it worked quite well. We have a battle scene. You can see some drakens in there. Some different armor designs, different dragons in the background. The goblins. So we have the Goblin King. These goblins. A reference I found for these goblins. I wanted to do something that you hadn't really seen before. And so the reference I used, I don't know if anybody saw those emails that went around of the world's ugliest dog. Have any of you seen that? Yeah, so I kind of used that sort of look as reference for these goblin faces. I thought it worked quite well. It's kind of hard to see, it's a little blurry, but here we have Morik's War. Again, you can see some drakens riding bears, dragons, armor. Wanted to say something about the detail. It's important when you're creating things like armor and costumes and weaponry to pay attention to the details. whether you're writing characters or illustrating them, it's really the details that give the sort of wow factor. And so don't just draw, big clunky, sections of clothing or armor. Go in there and give it a little TLC. Make it something new and different. You can see kind of the inspiration for my Draken armors has kind of a samurai flair. But I also wanted it to be functional and something that looks like it could actually work. And so you can see stuff that actually exists, but also stuff that looks a little fantasy as well mixed in. We have dragons with 4 arms, dragons with 2 arms, right? You can see the little guy on this one's back. Kind of shows the size, the scale of this particular dragon. This one's called Nalen's Mouth. So in the same room next hour, I'm going to do a little workshop for creature and character design. And so I'm actually going to have you guys design your own creatures and characters. And I'm going to walk around and help you, but also do some live demos up here. I might even pull a couple people from the audience to model as the characters. Might have you vote on who models for my drawings. But it's I always enjoy the panels where we do live demos. They seem to be a lot more fun. This one, the Minotaur race in Dragon's Gate, I wanted to incorporate something that I saw in Planet of the Apes, Tim Burton's version. I love when you're talking about the design of all of the different apes in Planet of the Apes. I loved that they didn't all look the same, like in the Charlton Heston version. You had apes that looked like orangutans, you had chimpanzees, you had gorillas, you had spider monkey apes. They basically took every monkey in existence and used all of those different looks for that specific race of apes. Because not all humans look the same, so why should all apes look the same, right? And so I kind of did the same thing for the Minotaur. You can see different bovine features. You have a water buffalo, you have a wildebeest, you have a Holstein. Basically, there's a goat, I think, in the background. It's hard to see on that. I basically took all of the bovine creatures that exist and made each their own individual look, which was, I thought, a pretty cool idea that I got from Planet of the Apes. Here's one of the more rendered Drakens. A little hard to see. Kind of a battle scene there. Does this look familiar to anybody, this composition? Has anybody heard of J.W. Waterhouse, John William Waterhouse? Pre-Raphaelite illustrator, painter. Anyway, this was inspired by his Hylas and the Nymphs painting. This is Tyrus and the Water Nymphs. And I put it into Dragon's Gate because I love that painting so much that I wrote a scene into the book that sort of mirrors that scene that he painted. And then I painted my own version of it, matching the characters. This is from a project I started last year. It got put on hold because once I got an agent for Blink, then I had to start writing the sequel for Blink. And so this was on hold, but it's called Defender of Lions. I might lose my voice by tomorrow. Hopefully I'll still be able to get my pen off. I just wanted to throw in a couple of my process. So I do the pencil work, and then that's with the color. This is Amrog, the Gorbane King. It's called Freyne's Demise. It's the scene that actually opens the story. Let's see, I skipped one there. Oh, maybe not. Okay. Alright, here's another action scene. We have Gorbane's Skirmish. So we have one race that rides these giant blue lions with scales, and another race, the Gorbanes, that ride these giant vulture-like birds called Kelleran. And this is a battle scene in the first, let's see, it's chapter 3, I believe. This is another illustrated novel idea. The reason I'm doing these illustrated novels is because I've done a lot of comics. And, comics have their own strengths, and novels have their own strengths. In novels, you can, get deep into the prose, the inner dialogue of your characters, talk about things that happen historically or aren't necessarily happening in the scene at hand. And you can go a lot deeper into your characters. And one of the strengths of comics, obviously, is the visual stimuli, I guess. But people's favorite page in a comic is the splash page, the one image that takes up the full frame. And so I thought with an illustrated novel, you get the brilliance of both. The illustrations that people love, the splash pages, but then you can also dive a little more deeply into the story without doing thought bubbles and dialogue bubbles. It's just so much deeper. I think we can all agree that you get a little more story-wise out of a novel than you do a comic or a graphic novel, no matter how cool or well done it is. This is a new illustration of the race. This is a race called the Virum. They're furry. They have moth-like wings. And I needed to create an environment that they live in. So this is their city. This is the governor of the Virum. And so I took all of their characteristics and I thought, what would the setting or environment look like that these characters live in? You can see the governor here on the left. And I thought of, okay, they're a desert people. Have any of you ever been to Lake Powell or Goblin Valley, maybe Dixie Rock in St. George? You know the little holes in the rock? If you look at the rock face, a cliff or something, there's a lot of little holes everywhere. And birds actually fly in and they live in these little holes. And I thought it's a cool idea to have an actual city built into kind of these cliffs with these holes and things. And so I kind of took that concept and sort of used it for these structures that the Virum build and live in and operate from. This is the other race in the story. There's three. There's the Gorbanes, the Virum, and then these are the Mycans. If you were comparing this to Lord of the Rings, the Virum would be kind of like the dwarves. The Gorbanes would be like the orcs, and the Mycans obviously would be like the elves, right? Very tall, very elegant, beautiful, very light, almost luminescent skin that glows, but they have these green stripes. And they basically worship these lions the same way that the Rohan worship horses. So they ride them and they very highly revere the lions. So these are basically the lion people. This is Roan. He's the main character. I wanted somebody that's human but also kind of cute, kind of animal-like. Somebody that's sympathetic. And so you can see he kind of has a cute face. I tried to incorporate a cougar, a chipmunk, and a puppy into his features, but he's obviously a man, so he has to have humanistic features as well. But then he's a Virum, so he's furry, and he also has the moth wings. But I wanted it somebody that looks like you could cuddle up with, and he'd be a nice guy. And so I think I accomplished that. This was the first illustration that I did. I had to get Roan right, and so I went through probably 10 different designs for his face alone. The body was a little easier, but I had to get that face right. I also do a little sculpture. I was part of a sculpture group, and I wanted to see if I could actually sculpt Roan in a way that would work. But it also kind of helped me to end up on this, was to actually build it with clay. I'm still not completely satisfied. This is a work in progress, by the way. I think I have a detail here. Yeah, right there. A little closer up. The illustration obviously is closer to what I was after than the sculpture is, but I wasn't quite finished. This was my first attempt at Karaya, the queen, who you already saw an illustration of. Obviously, I hadn't gotten to her clothing yet, but just very tall, very elegant. I was with the headdress. I was going for something that resembled the mane of a lion, but also had an alien but elegant feel. And then this is one of the Virum characters before I got to the fur, the details. This is kind of a rough layout. Okay. I think I'm about halfway through. What time is it here? Okay. So I'll kind of speed up here, and then we'll do. Let's see. So I'll just cruise through this. This is from Devil's Triangle. Obviously, I had to create these zombies and ghost-like creatures. It's a supernatural thriller that takes place in the Bermuda Triangle in the early 80s. And we actually used historical ships and planes that actually disappeared in the triangle, but also added our fictional flair to it. This is one of the bad guys. He's the second to the big bad, Mayhem, and that's one of his hellhounds. In Devil's Triangle, we tried to do something fun. If any of you are familiar with Indiana Jones, you realize that each movie has its own creature. Raiders of the Lost Ark, you have the snakes, right? The snake pit. In Temple of Doom, you have the bugs. In The Last Crusade, you have the rats. And in the latest, The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, you have the fire ants, right? And so we did a similar thing with Devil's Triangle. In issue 1, we have the great white scene here. Issue 2, we have the jellyfish, the box jellies. Issue 3, and this isn't like a huge thing with the story. This was just a fun little thing we put in, but it adds texture and layers to it. This is the flying fish. Moray eels in issue 4. Manta ray issue 5. So anyway, we'll have copies of Devil's Triangle at the book signing tonight as well if you want to check it out. It took me 6 years to illustrate. We released 1 issue per year. Every page is this detailed, by the way, and it has 204 pages. Well, I was working on Devil's Triangle and 2 or 3 other projects at the same time.
When did
so.
you sleep?
I'm prolific. I do a lot of stuff. This is Kamikaze. I'm just going to speed through these. This is a new comic that I just finished a couple months ago. I just submitted to Image and Dark Horse. It's a Western steampunk. You can see the different character designs. It fits in with the Western steampunk theme here. And I'll kind of go more into more of the comics at tomorrow's presentation about splash pages and comps and that sort of thing. And then American Girl. I've illustrated a few American Girl books. I did McKenna the Gymnast, which you can actually watch the film on Netflix right now. I actually actually they wouldn't allow me to hire them. I tried to pay them and they said they couldn't accept money or something, some rules for gymnasts. But anyway, I actually photographed girls that work out of Linden's All-American Gymnastics and cast the different characters. So when you're creating new characters, it doesn't necessarily have to be, is it a reptile, is it a cyborg? If you're writing middle adult or middle grade or young adult books, it's more, what kind of skin color do they have? What is their hairstyle? What kind of clothing do they wear? What does their wardrobe look like? What do they do? What accessories do they have? Those things, when you're talking about a company like American Girl, are of prime importance. Because when I was doing these illustrations for AG, I was not just working for one art director, I was working for a marketing department, a product department, and an editorial department. And so all of these people, 50 or so people, had to sign off on my illustrations. And again, I would cast, girls from All-American Gymnastics because they are gymnasts, the characters. I didn't want to just hire models, I wanted to hire actual gymnasts. And then also, this is my sister-in-law here that's with the pony holding the rope. And so I actually went out and photographed these girls actually climbing ropes, with the actual equipment around. Also designed her little labradoodle. That's McKenna and Josie at the waterfall. Skeleton Play is a little children's book project I did last year for my wife and I had conjoined twins that didn't survive. And so I did this little tribute to them called Skeleton Play. And the twins are actually in the book, but it was a fun little project, to do for them. And also, I always loved Tim Burton. His kind of weird, kind of creepy style, but he does very cool stories and very kind of cute, very human stories. And I loved, like in The Corpse Bride, where the land of the living is so dead and drab and gray. But the land of the dead is bright and happy and beautiful and fun. And so I kind of wanted to communicate that same idea with Skeleton Play. And kind of a fun little side note for this, I used celebrity likenesses in a lot of the skeletons. Can anybody guess who this is? I just thought it would be a fun little thing to add. But any resemblance to Samuel L. Jackson, maybe? Anybody find Whoopi Goldberg in this one?
Oh.
You find President Obama? What about Beyonce? Mike Tyson. See Mike Tyson in there? It's a little harder to see on the wall, but anyway, this one I have House. Anybody watch House? Can you see which one that is? Angelina Jolie, I think I put in this one. Quentin Tarantino. Bamishi, is that his name? That kind of, he's on a lot of Jerry Bruckheimer films. He's the mummy. Anyway, it was fun. This kind of shows my process here. It's kind of blurry on the wall, but pencils, inks, color, digital painting. It's one of the pages from Skeleton Play. I'll also have copies of Skeleton Play at the book signing tonight if you want to check it out. Like I say, this was just a fun little personal project for my twins, but kind of another example of the ink and then with the color. This one here has Robin Williams somewhere, Ron Howard, Madonna. And this is my newest project. This is the one I'm working on now. I'm pretty excited about this one. It's called Avila, sort of a mixture of Star Wars and Jurassic Park. But it's about this transport crew, interplanetary transport crew, that basically transports wild, exotic, alien monster animals from one planet to another, from one zoo to another. And so it's their story about this interplanetary transport crew. That's sort of a version of me that's a little more muscled. And my wife, who sort of looks like that, except she's expecting. Anyway, so this one's fun because I get to design all of these spaceships and hovercrafts, but my main characters are sort of alien, very diverse. So this is page 2. I'm just going to give you a quick preview. Page 3. Bob Defendi's one of my characters. I don't know if any of you know Bob, but he plays Bolo. Then you have Slaughter and Allie Mae here by the pool. Allie Mae does yoga with her yellow monkey. And then, so you have Gidget here, who's sort of amphibious. She dives down and catches fish in her teeth. And then you have sort of my, this is half of the team. And then at the top there you have Zebra and Gareth. And I'll kind of talk a little bit more about this at my panel tomorrow about comics and graphic novels. But I originally wrote the first 5 pages and illustrated the first 5, kind of as a preview, as a demo, kind of proof of concept. But the pacing was too fast. And so I basically went back to the drawing board and I turned the 5 pages into 7 pages. And so you can see in this page here, I'm working on this one now. Zebra is actually green and Gareth is a different person. And Bolo obviously is a different person. So I had to basically repace it and stretch the 5 pages into 7 pages. But creature and character design, this is my first alien monster that I introduced in issue 1. Which is called a Vister. And so that kind of concludes creature and character design. But if any of you are interested, I'll be doing live demos, and you guys will be actually working with me to create some of our own creatures and characters. So that's all I have for this one. Thanks, guys. And we'll start into our models. Awesome. While I'm doing this, kind of start working on your projects. I want you to start working on your specific character or creature for your story. And then if you have questions for the whole group about that, you can ask me. I'm usually pretty good at multitasking. I can talk about things while I'm drawing. I don't want you to get too stuck on details right now. I just want you to ask yourself these questions that we've kind of been discussing. Flesh them out as a person or as an animal, creature. All right, so this thing's pretty cool. Thank you for bringing this. This is great. I think this will work for our models. Okay. So you can tell it doesn't take long to do a quick sketch or something. You've been doing it as long as I have. When Jurassic Park came out, I was 13 years old. It came out in 1993. And I was obsessed. I saw it 6 times in the theater. If you really think about it, Jurassic Park is the first time that we actually saw real dinosaurs. Right? We had seen, there were a few documentaries and a few movies that had the stop motion animation, but they were clunky. They weren't real. We watched Jurassic Park and we're like, wow, these are real dinosaurs. This is what they look like. This is how they moved. I was obsessed. Everything Jurassic Park. And I spent the next 2 years kind of studying dinosaur anatomy. And so we all have those little things that we're passionate about, the things that really speak to us, the things we focus on. And so for your story, I don't know if any of you have heard the phrase, write what you know. Also write what you're passionate about, like what gets you excited when people start talking about it in conversation. We all have those projects, right, that actually put a fire under us, that we actually get excited about. And so I want you to focus on that for the next, what do we have, 30 minutes or so? 3:23, all right. Okay, so what I'm going to do is does anybody have any more questions for the whole group, like we've talked about? All right, so where are my models? Let me have you both stand up here real quick. Okay, so you're the character and you're the creature. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to do the character first, and we're going to have the character fighting the creature. So the creature can sit down, keep working on their thing, and we'll have you come up. It's Hannah, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Hannah's going to come up and help us. Can I have you sort of help me get this set up here? All right, how comfortable are you in front of an audience, a crowd?
Ish.
Okay. How comfortable are you? How sturdy are these tables, you guys? Don't worry, not the creature too. You're gonna have to do.
They look pretty
What do you
stable.
think?
They're pretty metal framing.
Are we safe? I won't get in trouble with like a fire marshal or something. All right, I'm gonna have you stand on the table.
You want to move the
You can take your shoes off.
tablecloth off though? That
Yeah,
might make it less
might be a
slippery.
good idea.
Good idea.
Yeah. It's probably all right, stand right in the middle so it doesn't
The
fall.
tablecloth will be more slippery.
Yeah, I want you to take a sturdy stance. Okay. Are you comfortable?
Sure.
Okay. You guys all witnessed her say sure. Okay.
Are you over 18?
Yeah, so you can
you're in
either
trouble.
raise this over. Give me a little thicker, how do you adjust the thickness of the brush? On this one?
Do you want a brush or do you want a pen?
Let's do same thing, just a little bigger.
There you go.
This side. What does that do?
You're pressing the button.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's actually pretty good. Let's go with that. And then how do you erase the whole thing on this one?
Move it back out. Or just do it.
All right, cool. So we're gonna have her be the character. Let me get a raise of hands. You guys are going to help me decide what we draw. So, fantasy or sci-fi? All the hands for fantasy. Okay, and sci-fi. Okay, so fantasy. So it's a fantasy character. Obviously, she's female. Do you want to do ancient fantasy, Lord of the Rings sort of style, or modern, more like Harry Potter? We'll say ancient. Okay, and modern. Okay, so ancient, fantasy, female. All right, is she a warrior, maiden, fairy, or something new?
Wizard.
And if wizard. Okay. How many did I say? Okay, we'll say wizard. Okay, fairy. No fairy.
I'm not
Okay.
a fairy wizard.
Did I say warrior? Warrior? Fighter? Quite a bit. Okay. And what was the other one I said? We'll just do a warrior. Ancient fantasy warrior. Cool. You are fighting a creature, so. Alright, so ancient fantasy warrior. I think
Shoulders back, you know.
I think that gives me
Sorta.
I think that gives me enough of a purview. So let's do a stance now. Widen your stance. You're a warrior, you're a fighter. Have you ever fought anybody? Is it a part of like the lightsaber
Chin
club
up,
or
look
anything?
intimidating.
All right, so you guys help
There you
her.
go.
I always kind of clue people in on the audience or whatever. The trick to good acting. 3 words. Anybody know what those 3 words are?
Absolutely.
No. She
Can I
knows.
show her a possible pose?
So what's that?
Can I show her a possible pose that she could do?
Sure. Show her an impossible pose. Yeah, that's pretty
Like,
cool.
Sword in one hand, shield in the other, wide stance.
Okay, cool. All right. So the key to good acting, you know, the difference between like Russell Crowe and whatever bad actor you can think of. 3 words. All or
Nothing.
nothing. You got to commit to the character. Otherwise, you shouldn't be playing the character because you'll just embarrass yourself. So, all or nothing. So, you're fighting a creature. I'm going to have you be on the left, so the creature is going to be over there. What kind of weapons should she have? Sword, spear, bow staff, giant battle axe?
Sword.
Okay, battle axe. It's always good to have props. What can we use as a battle axe?
Here?
Let's see, what can we use? A bottle of water. Okay, this is your battle axe. See, that way I get the right hand width, right? It's easier to draw when you have good reference. When I take photos of people, I'll have them holding brooms. Yeah, I mean, whatever you're doing, I'll have little toy guns, you know, if I'm doing a sci-fi or a thriller. And then I'll change the toy guns into actual big, beefy guns, you know, or whatever, what I'm drawing. But it's helpful to have that reference. And it's also helpful for the actor or the model to have something to use. All right, so I'm going to have you take a pose, a fighting pose, and you're going to hold it as long as you can. Okay, you guys got to help her out. How do you use a battle axe?
2 hands.
2-handed, and you swing and smash.
Okay, so I'm going to have you widen your stance. In fact, why don't you go down on one knee on the back, and your front arm like way out in front of you like this, and your back arm holding your battle axe like you're about to swing. Yeah, so kind of go like this, kind of like the Heisman Trophy, right? Football. Okay, and crouch a little more forward, and look at where your hand is pointed. Yeah, that's good. Okay. All right. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. There we go. Just reading me. All right. And if any of you guys have any questions or anything, just throw them out there.
Yeah, for practice. Many practice.
All or nothing. You're angry at something.
You just found your ex-boyfriend. And the girl he's with is like way uglier than you.
No, that's triumph.
She's way hotter than you.
Yeah, that's pissed. You know, there you go.
You know, you asked that question, do you focus more on the body or the face? It's always good to kind of get the main forms out there before you actually go in for the details. So a simple answer to your question would be the body. All right. I'm gonna make a new kind of battle axe. I'm gonna try to do something I've never seen before. And so since it's new, she would hold it a little differently. Anybody watch the making of Avatar? So what do the Na'vi use as their preferred weapon of choice? Bow and arrow, right? Do they shoot it like a regular archer. What's different?
They pull it with their fingers in. So
Yeah.
and actually, Kirk Cameron liked that quite a bit. But one of the people that was there,
You guys hear?
one of their subject matter experts said, "You never hit anything like that." So he said, "Hit that bush about 100 yards away or whatever," and the person just pulled, drew, and hit it.
No, it wasn't the person. It was James Cameron.
Oh, it was him.
Yeah. I'm also giving it a little foreshortening here, so it's sort of angled up from the ground up, so her legs are a little bigger than the upper. You'll be able to see that a little easier as I finish it out. This is easier, one reason, because I can erase immediately. I don't have to switch brushes to erase, and that's one of the reasons I still prefer to draw traditionally. I know there are a lot of workarounds and stuff with the digital. I always prefer to work with my hands, my arms, rather than just my wrist, little movements with the wrist.
So you're starting out with basic shapes.
Right.
So if there was a book that would help you with anatomy, what would you prefer, like, for tutorial-wise in a way?
You know, I've used a lot of different anatomy books. Anatomy for the Artist is a good one. Drawing Dynamic Figures, Vern Hogarth is a good one. But also just drawing from life. You know, doing your own photo shoots, taking pictures of models that you like. You know, they can be friends or family members, siblings. People actually enjoy modeling. It's usually when I ask people to model as characters in my stories, I get nothing but excitement and cooperation. It's fun. You know, people enjoy it.
It's also a very hard job.
But and it's, you know, it's obviously easier in photo shoots than, you know, when you're working from a live model, because they don't have to sit there. But I know a lot of sculptors and painters that do hire live models. Let me have you do more of this with your hand. So spread it as wide as you can from thumb to, yeah.
Amazon Word.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right, so once I have kind of the basic shape of everything, then I'll go in and start adding detail. Let me just erase some of these lines I'm not using here.
Maybe chick you don't want to take off.
Yeah, feel free to just rest there for a sec. Stretch out.
Let the blood get back down to your fingers.
Okay. Yeah, while you're resting, I'll just I'll start this kind of little battle axe thing here.
It was a prized physician when he
Okay. Okay. Assume the pose. All right. So we decided this was ancient fantasy. I'm gonna give her giant ears.
That's a huge ass.
All right. Let's see if we can make this look like her with a marker on a whiteboard. Yep, hold the pose, I'm doing your face. I'm going to exaggerate her hair just so it's bigger. I've seen a lot of fantasy, the hair will be exaggerated just because it adds more movement and body picture. How are we on time? Somebody have the time?
3:39.
Oh, yikes. Okay.
Your ear screw, just letting you know.
All right.
Sandy, you're giving me
And
a
don't
Face.
drop that back armor, there's gonna be serious consequences.
All right.
You're gonna lose an ear that way.
Listen here.
Okay.
I just-
This one's a little too big, so I'm gonna bring it down a little. Too pleasant. All right, I'm gonna add armor here. It's been fun. A little bit of staggered armor and a lot of fantasy. Yeah, that's good. You can just model your arm for a moment. Alright, in lieu of our limited time, I'm gonna condense this a little.
Wouldn't the ear on the other side be poking up?
It would. Yeah, that's a detail I haven't gotten to yet. No criticisms until I see it's finished. So.
You can let her wear that earring.
Alright, kind of something fleshing out here. Alright, now I'm going to do your left arm. So you can relax for a second. The other arm. This one, so. Alright. Straight. Okay. Yeah. This is very crude and very rushed, so just keep that in mind. All right, so now your lower half. I'll give you some cool, let's see, maybe like a loincloth or something hanging down in the middle. A little lower. Let me have you widen your stance just a tad. Yeah, there you go. And that, your front foot a little bit more in front of you. Sorry, that probably hurts on the table. I'm sorry, I'll try to hurry.
That way I can carry my physical around.
Okay. And then, generally there's a lot of armor around the knee, on the joints. I'll sort of exaggerate that a little here. Okay, and then we have cool fantasy boots. One of the coolest things about fantasy costumes is the boots. Right? Hey, Brent, how's it going?
I left my notes somewhere, so I'm trying to find them.
Okay, so cool boots. We'll give her sort of pirate boots here. Okay, so we kind of have our character here emerging out of these scribbles. Okay. Okay, well, for a 10-minute sketch, we have our character. All right. Then we can kind of cool, make little cool embellishments, things like that. And I could work a little bit more, but I think that's all we need from the model. So big round of applause for Hannah. Oh, and I'll show the point of this other ear there for you. Okay, there we go. And she's got the cool flowy hair here.
You can snap off a picture of that.
Okay. Okay, creature, get up here. We're very limited with time. I'm just gonna have you take a pose, and whatever comes to me, so we don't have time to vote. So get up there and pretend like you're fighting what Hannah just posed. So you're facing this way, and since she's looking a little bit into the foreground, I'm gonna see kind of more of your back. So I want this arm forward, this arm back, and you're coming at her. You're gonna eat her.
Show some teeth.
All right.
Smile.
You're on candid camera.
All right, there we go. Okay, so there's my base for a creature. So I'm going to follow her eye line, so his face would be about here. Maybe she is up on a little ledge here, so I can make him a little bigger, a little more formidable creature. All right, so now I'm going to incorporate his hoodie into this creature. Alright, so we have his shoulders sort of covering up his chin there. Got pretty wide shoulders. Arm coming down there.
Looks like he's been pumping iron.
So I'm using his jacket to kind of give him more girth, obviously, turning those into muscles. Because I can't see his muscles, obviously. But I won't ask you to pose nude in front of everybody here today, so I don't think the Marriott would appreciate that so much. No, that's sort of a joke, right? The nude models or whatever. When you take college art courses, some of those are required for art majors. And yeah, that can make some people uncomfortable, but it's really about learning the anatomy and the muscular structures, because then you can learn how the clothing would be affected by what's underneath. It's the same as knowing the structure. Can I have you raise your hand actually up so I can see? There you go. A little bit higher. There you go. Oh, not quite that high. There you go. It's the same as understanding the skeletal structure, understanding what a skull looks like before drawing a face. If you know what's underneath the skin, it's easier to make a more believable rendering of a face. Okay. Alright. Now this hoodie coming down. I'm going to turn that into a hooded cloak here. Give him sort of more of a skeletal face here. How are we on time? Does anybody have the time?
3:48.
Alright, well I'll just do my closing statements early while I'm finishing this up. So I got some prints in the art show, check those out. And I'll be doing a book signing tonight. We'll be selling copies of Devil's Triangle, Dragon's Gate, Skeleton Play. I think that's at 8 o'clock tonight in the ballroom. And then tomorrow I've got a few panels. I think I have 3. definitely check out the amphitheater. I think it's around 2 or 3 o'clock. It's thumbnails, comps, panels, and splash pages. So if you're into comics or graphic novels, that'll be a good one. All right. I'm kind of running out of time here. I can't really pimp out the details, but you guys will get the main gist. So it's helpful sometimes to use models when you're creating things, and you can have sort of a base in reality and have a reference to start from. Just give them time to look cool. All right, but a short little 2-minute Q&A here. Does anybody have any questions before we finish up? Hopefully you guys drew something for your project that's helpful to you, and we'll get you thinking about how you can flesh out your creatures and your characters. We'll just end it there. I don't have a lot of time, so anyway, hey, big hand, big round of applause. All right, any questions before you guys head out?
If you take a picture of him instead of having him stand there,
oh yeah, it would be way better. Yeah, and then you don't have the movement.
But is there any degradation because of the picture for lots of 3D?
Yes.
You do get some of that. It's usually not something that people detect.
Yeah.
But you can kind of see problems with photographs when you're working from photographic reference. Usually you can see the problems. A lot of times people's hands will look too small. There's foreshortening issues. And sometimes when you look at the photograph, you don't stay 100% true to the photograph. You actually, in your mind, you fix those problems. And as you practice more and more, the more easily you'll recognize where the problems are in the photographic reference, and you can just fix those without even thinking about it. And so, yeah, photos are good to work from, but yeah, you do get issues like that you have to fix as you're working. So, any other questions?
I have a artist kid right now, and once she gets done with high school, what do you recommend, like an art program at a good college or whatever? Or
Yeah, I learned more from my illustration professor at Utah State than all of my years of art school combined previous. High school art teachers, let me just say this, most, I won't say all, that's generalizing, most high school art teachers are there for the paycheck. Whereas college professors, you get people that were professional in their field, generally previous to becoming a professor. And so you learn more from university professors generally than from high school or middle school art teachers. And the best teacher is practice. You don't need a teacher to tell you everything that you can learn from an anatomy book. You can just go buy the book and work on your own. And that's mostly what I did. Most of the things I learned, I didn't learn from a teacher. I learned from doing it. So, anyway, good question. Yeah, maybe one more? Are we out of time? All right. Brian Hales. Hey guys, thanks for coming. It was fun.